Why intelligent people are not interested in social life. The lonely genius. Some wounds leave no scars but reshape the soul forever. This video explores 13 hidden traits, often found in people who've suffered deeply, yet never told their story out loud. Inspired by Carl Jung's psychological insights, we reveal how trauma hides behind strength, perfectionism, silence, or even kindness. You'll understand why the strongest person in the room is often the one silently holding the most pain. But this isn't just about hurt. It's about healing, about recognizing yourself in these patterns and realizing you're not broken. You've just carried more than most. Stay with us as we explore not how to hide the pain, but how to understand it and begin the journey back to yourself. When intelligent people choose silence amid the crowd, have you ever wondered why intelligent people often choose silence over joining lively conversations? It's not because they lack words, nor are they short of thoughts, quite the opposite. That's precisely why they're more cautious about what they say to them. Every word carries weight, and every conversation must hold a certain depth to be worth starting. In a world where noise is equated with existence, intelligent people often feel out of place, not because they look down on others, but because they cannot tolerate the falseness in surface-level interactions. They see clearly the gap between small talk and inner truth. Their spiritual sensitivity makes them easily worn down in relationships that are loud but lack substance. Schopenhauer once said that a person is only truly themselves when alone, and those who cannot love solitude will never truly know what freedom is. For the intellectually inclined, silence isn't emptiness. It's a space for thinking, for intuition, for healing from the invisible wounds inflicted by society. They choose silence, not out of weakness, but because inside them is a world in motion, and it is in that solitude that they begin to hear their true voice, a voice that doesn't need to shout over the crowd, yet still resonates deeply within the soul. This is not withdrawal, but a return, not avoidance, but preparation. A fabricated world. Through Schopenhauer's eyes, Schopenhauer didn't mince words when speaking of society. To him, the world humans build around themselves is one great theater, where every person wears a mask, not necessarily to hide something wicked, but simply to survive conversations he believed are rarely about genuine understanding, but about maintaining a rhythm of social politeness. Truth is replaced by convenience, and sincerity distorted to fit the roles we learned long ago. He argued that modern society discourages independent thinking. In fact, it fears it. Those who think too much or feel too deeply are often seen as strange, eccentric, or even dangerous because they refuse to play by the rules in a world of shallow talk, trivial pursuits, and hollow standards. The intelligent feel as if they're living in a dream they can't wake up from. Schopenhauer observed that the more intelligent someone is, the harder it is for them to pretend. They cannot laugh at what doesn't amuse them, nod at what they don't believe in, or stay silent about what breaks their heart. And so, they begin to withdraw not because they despise humanity, but because they can no longer find authenticity in what we call communal life. And so, they stand at the margins, not because they want to be different, but because society is shaped to accommodate simpler, easier, more digestible things in Schopenhauer's view. It is precisely this awareness that makes integration impossible. But is that a flaw or proof that they are living true to themselves? Why intelligence creates an unbridgeable distance. Intelligence is not just the ability to reason or retain facts for Schopenhauer. True intelligence is the capacity to perceive the essence of things beyond their surface. It is the ability to see what others overlook, the hidden motives behind actions, the desires buried in someone's gaze, the mental patterns society repeats unconsciously like a nameless ritual. And that variability creates distance. The more attuned one is to the psychological depth and true nature of life, the more isolated they may feel, not because they don't want connection, but because they struggle to find someone who speaks their spiritual language. Trivial conversations drain them. Popular interests, status, fame, entertainment fail to touch the core of their being. When you see too clearly, you can no longer blend, and easily awareness becomes an invisible wall separating you from the world. You can't pretend not to see. You can't ignore the things that stir conflict within you. So even in a crowd, you may feel deeply alone. Schopenhauer called this the inevitable outcome of intellectual transcendence. The more one knows, the more one understands, the harder it is to find a companion on the same mental path. This distance doesn't come from arrogance, it comes from reality. What keeps the intelligent awake at night rarely exists in the concerns of the majority, and so they choose silence, not to separate themselves, but because there's no other way to preserve the integrity of their soul. Real freedom begins with separation. Schopenhauer once wrote, "A person is only truly themselves when alone." For him, solitude was not a tragedy, but a prerequisite for spiritual freedom. While society endlessly imposes standards and expectations, it is only by stepping outside the noise that we get a chance to hear our inner voice. In separation, one is allowed to ask questions without rushing to answer, to be no one. In order to discover who they truly are, no need to please others, no need to chase the labels society has stuck to their identity. And it is in this isolation that observation sharpens, emotions refine, and intuition becomes a trusted guide. Freedom is not the ability to do whatever we want. It is the ability not to be bound by what we never chose. For the intelligent, this means being free from the judgment, praise, and expectations of others. But the price of that freedom is separation physically and spiritually. It's easy to blend in by staying silent around falsehood. It's harder to stay true to yourself when surrounded by performance. And so the intelligent, unable to betray their awareness, choose to step out of the collective play to live honestly, even if it means paying the price of loneliness. But in doing so, they begin to touch a rare kind of freedom. Freedom in thought, in emotion, and in being fully present with themselves. When great minds seek refuge in isolation, history has no shortage of brilliant minds who chose to live in the shadows. Far from society's spotlight, Nikola Tesla spent his later years in seclusion at a hotel. Avoiding human contact, Emily Dickinson rarely left her home. Yet from that inner world came hundreds of timeless poems. Newton was so immersed in experiments and mathematics that he sometimes forgot other people existed. And Kant, with a life as precise as a clock, shunned social distractions to preserve the clarity of his intellect. Were they abnormal, or did their unique ways of thinking make ordinary interactions unbearable? Their isolation wasn't avoidance. It was a deliberate choice, a sacred space to protect their thinking, creativity, and depth of insight. In a world that constantly demands presence, their silence was a subtle rebellion. They didn't speak often, didn't appear frequently, but every idea, every discovery, every thought they left behind carried the weight of eternity. It was in the quiet they carved out for themselves that the ideas which shaped the world were conceived. They weren't alone because they were weak, but because they needed to protect something sacred that the noisy world couldn't hold. And in retreating, they created a silent but powerful legacy, a testament that sometimes stepping back is not retreating, but moving forward deeper, truer, and farther than anyone can see. The price of depth is a nameless pain. No one ever said isolation was pleasant, and Schopenhauer never romanticized it. He acknowledged that while solitude grants intellectual freedom, it also carries undertows, emptiness, doubt, and a sadness that defies words. The deeper one looks into the nature of life, the more easily they tire of what they uncover, because not every truth is comforting. Some truths rob us of sleep, leaving us feeling alien in the very world we live in. This is why so many brilliant minds, despite their intellectual success, often face periods of depression, anxiety, or existential crisis, not because they are weak, but because their minds are open to questions no one else dares confront. Their isolation isn't just physical, it's a divide in perception when no one understands your thoughts. When you cannot share feelings others have never felt, that is existential loneliness. Schopenhauer saw this clearly and didn't deny its darkness. He called it the price to be paid for intellectual superiority, yet within that pain, something precious quietly unfolds. Transformation, if not repressed. These emotions can become fuel for creativity, for compassion, for inner growth. Sadness is not the enemy, it's a wake-up call, reminding us we're alive, feeling something deeper than surface-level life. And if the intelligent can accept sadness as part of the journey, they won't be drowned by it. On the contrary, they'll emerge with a stronger heart, a heart that has been broken, but never stopped beating. When society feels like an endless stage play, Schopenhauer didn't just see society as false, he likened it to a grand stage where every person plays a role, recites rehearsed lines, and mimics expressions they believe necessary to be accepted. No one is truly themselves. Everything is choreographed to maintain harmony. Yet that harmony comes at the cost of genuine depth. In such a world, intelligent people don't just feel tired, they feel misplaced. Because they can't play their roles without discomfort, they notice what others try to hide. Hear the silence between words, and sense insincerity in a glance or handshake. For them, fitting in becomes an unnatural act. The more their awareness grows, the more allergic they become to performative interactions, small talk, hollow compliments, superficial relationships. All of it feels like wasting their life force. They can't pretend to care about things that hold no value to them. Nor can they force themselves to maintain fragile connections just to feel a sense of belonging. In this society, if you refuse to act, you're deemed an outsider. But Schopenhauer insisted that truth is not found in the roles we play, it's found in those who dare step off the stage, those who choose authenticity over acceptance, those who stay honest, even when it makes others uncomfortable. These are the ones who choose depth over comfort. Not everyone is willing to pay that price, but for the intelligent, truth is worth more than applause. They don't need approval. They just need to remain honest with themselves. And that is the only role they're unwilling to abandon. When you speak a language the majority doesn't understand, one of the greatest tragedies for the intelligent is the sense of speaking a language no one understands. It's not that their vocabulary is complex, it's that they ask different questions, care about things others never think about, while most ask, how can I be liked? They wonder, how can I be authentic? While others chase comfort, they seek meaning, and this difference in values creates an invisible, unbreakable barrier. This incompatibility goes beyond conversation topics. It permeates the entire realm of communication. The deeper someone thinks and feels, the more disoriented they become in shallow exchanges. They can listen to talk about the news, the weather, or gossip, but their soul longs to speak of the human condition, of suffering, freedom, and unanswerable questions. And when they do try to share, most responses are deflection, indifference, or even ridicule, not because they are wrong, but because they've moved beyond the range others are ready to receive so gradually. They grow silent, not because they have nothing to say, but because they find no one truly listening. Schopenhauer understood this pain. He called it intellectual loneliness, a loneliness born not of lacking people, but lacking spiritual connection. And it is this type of loneliness that exhausts intelligent people in society, because deep down, they know what they crave isn't more conversation, but one presence that truly understands, something rarely found in the modern world. They don't give up on communication, they become selective. For once you've touched the depths of thought, you can't pretend surface talk is enough. That's why they retreat, not to escape, but to protect their mental space and preserve the language of their soul from dilution. When the world doesn't understand you and turns away, the withdrawal of the intelligent is not always a one-sided choice. Sometimes it is society that pushes them into the shadows, not because they've done wrong, but because they're too different in how they think, feel, and especially in their refusal to conform to pretense. And that difference, instead of being honored, is often seen as a threat. Nietzsche called it the resentment of the mediocre, the smoldering emotion people feel when confronted by something they don't understand or secretly envy. When someone stands for truth, refuses to play along, they are not welcomed. They are seen as strange, arrogant, even dangerous, not because they hurt anyone, but because their presence reveals what others would rather ignore. That's why many thinkers, artists, and scientists are sidelined, not only because they are alone, but because they are rejected truth. Unconsciously, always exposes, and the one who dares speak it, whether with words or presence, often becomes the target of suspicion. Schopenhauer didn't sugarcoat the cost of being different. He knew the price of living truthfully, thinking deeply, and refusing to compromise is steep. But he also emphasized that it's the only path to not betray oneself. Because if you must pretend to be accepted, you are trading away the truest part of you, something nothing else can replace. Intelligent people don't desire isolation. They crave connection just like anyone else. But when that connection demands the sacrifice of depth, they'd rather walk alone. And so, society's rejection becomes a reason to turn inward into the only space where they can be fully themselves, without judgment, without distortion, a quiet realm where they no longer need permission to simply exist. Living within society without losing yourself. If isolation is a reality that intelligent individuals must face, then a deeper question follows. How do you live within society without being consumed by it? By it, Schopenhauer didn't advocate total withdrawal from the world. He understood that no matter how profound, humans are social beings, they still need some level of connection, of sharing, of being understood. But the difference lies in approach. Schopenhauer proposed a lifestyle of emotional detachment, living among the world without being ruled by it. That is, the intelligent can still exist within society, but they don't let the noise, drama, and judgment of the crowd disturb their inner clarity. They don't seek to change the world, nor allow the world to change their essence. This doesn't mean being cold or indifferent, in fact. It requires heightened awareness to know when you're being pulled, to remind yourself to return, to decide what to keep and what to release. They learn to listen without reacting, to observe without becoming entangled. They may join a conversation, but their mind remains anchored like a philosopher sitting at the edge of the world, present yet sovereign. This strategy mirrors the Stoic spirit, not controlling the outside world, but mastering internal response, not chasing validation, but cultivating self-sufficiency. And like the Eastern monk, they don't withdraw to escape, but to see more clearly. In reality, intelligent people don't need many relationships. They only need a few authentic ones. To avoid complete isolation, They don't need to be heard by many, only understood by a few. And while the world rushes forward in haste, they choose to slow down, not out of slowness, but because they know exactly where they're going and won't lose themselves on the way. Loneliness is not a punishment. It's a chance to return inward in modern society. Loneliness is often painted in a negative light as a sign of social failure, mental instability, or rejection. But Schopenhauer thought otherwise. He saw loneliness as a privilege, a state that only minds strong enough could endure, even cherish. Not everyone is ready to face themselves. Most of us need noise, events, people, and social media to fill the void within. We fear silence because it echoes questions we are not ready to answer. Who am I? What am I living for? What am I running from? But the intelligent are different. They don't flee their inner world, they enter it, explore it, and learn to coexist with it. In the silence that the world dismisses, they begin to hear the subtlest sounds, suppressed emotions, unhealed memories, unspoken desires, and there, a journey begins not towards something, but back to something, back to an unaltered essence untouched by social roles, back to the true meaning of being alive. Schopenhauer called this state the highest mental space, a place where one is no longer disturbed by the crowd, nor manipulated by instinct. Here, thought becomes clear, emotion understood, and intuition emerges as a trusted guide. Of course, this is not an easy path. It demands the courage to sit still while others run, the bravery to confront one's inner shadows. But the reward for walking through that loneliness is a profound sense of freedom, one not dependent on circumstances or other people. While society defines value through connection, the intelligent understand, sometimes, disconnection is the most necessary thing so we can reset, rebuild, and reconnect with the deepest part of ourselves. Intellectual freedom, a privilege for those who dare walk alone. The freedom Schopenhauer spoke of isn't about having many choices, but about standing firm when only one path remains, the one no one else dares to take. It's a kind of freedom that can't be bought with wealth or status, but can only be earned when you detach from public expectations and stop fitting into scripted social roles. When the intelligent accept isolation, it's not a rejection of the world. It's the protection of a sacred space where thought can soar. Truth doesn't have to be diluted to be digestible, and honesty with oneself isn't punished by suspicious stares. They know loneliness is the price of inner integrity, and they are willing to pay it without complaint, without begging to be understood. In this separation, they do not seek to stand out, but to see clearly. They don't need to become someone. They only need to become themselves, unshaped by stereotypes, unbound by comparison. And only when they stop chasing validation do they begin to experience a kind of freedom most never taste, autonomy of the spirit. Schopenhauer didn't romanticize isolation, but he believed only in solitude could we hear our truest voice. Only when not swept away by society can we realize where we're really going. And only when we turn off the external noise can we hear the rhythm of a meaningful life. Intellectual freedom, in this sense, is both a gift and a test. It demands clarity, courage, and unshakable will, and those willing to walk alone through that quiet space will find not only depth, but themselves, whole and no longer needing to prove anything. The healing journey begins with accepting loneliness. From the outside, loneliness may look like an empty room, a quiet pause in a busy life, but for the intelligent, it's the beginning of a journey, not one that stretches outward, but one that goes deep within. And that journey can only begin when we stop seeing loneliness as something to fight and start learning to live with it as a companion. Schopenhauer understood that loneliness isn't always pleasant. At times, it becomes a mirror reflecting every unhealed wound, disappointments, abandoned desires, unanswered questions. But only through the stillness of solitude can these things rise to the surface. When we are no longer distracted by society, we begin to see ourselves more clearly than ever before. And from that, true healing begins not by seeking someone else to fill the emptiness, but by turning inward, embracing the forgotten fragments of ourselves. Acceptance, not urgency, not judgment, is the first medicine. Acceptance that we have been alone, that we are different, that we crave more depth than everyday life usually offers. This very acceptance creates space for compassion, not just for others, but first for ourselves. The intelligent, in healing, don't aim to change themselves to fit in. They learn to love who they are, even the parts no one else has understood. And in that love, loneliness is no longer a wound but soil for rebirth, for growth, for becoming something whole without needing the world's approval. Healing does not begin with connection. It begins when we stop running from solitude. And those who dare walk through its silence won't just find themselves, they'll create a path for others, silently carrying the same pain. Staying grounded in a world that wants you to drift, to live in a world full of noise and conformity yet remain centered, is both an art and a test for the intelligent. Every day is a trial. How to preserve your inner world while the outer world pushes you to change, to echo, to live by someone else's design. Schopenhauer offered no fixed formula, but his thought carries a powerful reminder. Be selective, select your inputs, select your feelings. Above all, select your people. Not everyone deserves your full presence. Not every conversation needs a response. Not everything that stirs you is worth your energy. The intelligent learn to preserve their inner purity by building invisible boundaries, not to isolate, but to protect the mental ground they've cultivated. They don't waste energy on what doesn't nourish them. They learn to be silent without feeling abandoned, and they understand that sometimes not reacting is the best way to stay whole. In a world that easily leads us astray, returning to oneself is not selfish. It's vital. Staying grounded doesn't mean withdrawing from life. It means choosing to live consciously, awake enough not to be swept away, deep enough not to be lost. When isolation leads you to your true purpose, not everyone is born to blend into the crowd. Some are born to observe in silence, to reflect, to dig to the roots of things. Others only glance at isolation, while at first lonely, slowly becomes a sacred space where the seeds of life purpose begin to sprout. Schopenhauer didn't view isolation as a destination, but as a doorway to something deeper. Awakening only when a person dares to detach from the noise can they truly hear their inner calling, not imposed by society, not shaped by expectation, but echoing from the core of their being. Purpose is not something we choose. It is something we recognize when we are finally clear enough to see. And it rarely arrives with applause or spotlight. It comes in silent moments, when we realize we have a responsibility not just to know, but to use that knowledge to light the path for others. The intelligent, if they travel far enough into solitude, will not stay there forever. They return not to conform, but to radiate, not to be accepted, but to help others see themselves more clearly. And then, loneliness is no longer a burden. It is the foundation for a purposeful life. Quiet, but deeply impactful, because sometimes the one who walks alone is paving the way for a generation. You're not lost, you're awakening. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong in loud conversations, if you felt out of place in a world driven by beliefs you don't share, perhaps you're not in the wrong place. Perhaps you're just awakening a little earlier than others. Schopenhauer didn't write for the masses. He wrote for souls who walk slowly, think deeply, and feel the world on a different frequency. Loneliness, for the intelligent, isn't a sign of failure, it's proof of depth. And if you're brave enough not to run from that solitude, you'll discover that it's the place you begin to be reborn, not as someone the world approves of, but as your unfiltered, awakened, grounded self. This journey isn't easy, but you are not alone. There is a quiet world walking beside you, people who aren't loud, who don't perform, but who are living truthfully, thinking deeply, healing gradually, and you, too, are part of that light. You don't have to be fully understood, just steady enough not to lose yourself. As Schopenhauer once wrote, loneliness is not the problem. The problem is being with the wrong people. Better to walk alone and awakened than to conform and trade away the truth within your heart.